We just watched the 1990s movie Sneakers. In it, a hacker uses a voice replay attack to gain access to a secure system. This was just a Hollywood sci-fi plot 30 years ago, but now it's a real threat. Fast forward to today, and we're saying, my voice is my password to verify and authenticate ourselves to our bank. Isn't it crazy how fast AI is progressing? I'm Esty, and I work at Invoca as a security engineer. Invoca does conversational intelligence, which means I get to work at the intersection of cutting-edge AI, security, and audio. Interestingly enough, my co-presenter, Bivu, works in a very similar industry. Let him talk about himself.
Thank you for the introduction, Esty. I'm Bivu, and I work for a company that does voice authentication, fraud detection, and recently, a lot of deepfake detection. I also get to work in cutting-edge AI, and as a ticket, that feels amazing. And at this point, you guys might be thinking like, hey, do Esty and Bivu know each other from the industry? However, that is not the case. We actually know each other from Boulder, where I live, and where she's from. And our WeWork in Boulder has something called Idea Thursday, where you get to work on ideas and discuss ideas they want to build. And turns out both Esty and I were wondering about the same thing. Essentially, there's this long-running idea that people get attracted to people who look similar to them. There's a lot of mention of this on literature, but not a lot of hard data to back that up. And we were like, hey, we have like means and tools to work on this now. So we actually decided to do a hackathon project on this. So what happened here? Okay, finally figured out. So essentially, like that's an actual photo of us trying to work on the basement. But but seriously though, like turns out like when you put a prompt of a Nepalese man and a Jewish woman working together, the prompts are really bad. So actually, like we had to use Photoshop for the final touches, and I think it came out really well. And if you guys are curious, the app was really, really, really simple. Essentially, you just put 2 photos of people you want to match, and it gives you a match percentage, right? Like so, if you're identical twin, you might be in the 90s. If your siblings might be in the 40s to 60s. Sometimes like people might be as low as single digit. But the thing is, it turns out like what we were thinking was correct. And it didn't come easy. Like we were just matching like thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Like we like scrape internet data from Reddit, you know? And it's like a little problematic for me because of the fact that like our hypothesis was correct because I live in Boulder. And if you have never been to Boulder, it's mostly white. So as you can see, that was not the best news for me. And at this point, like, you know, like we are like already extracting facial features. And we were like, if people exhibit the subconscious preferences, what if like your manager has preferences for one group of people over the other? And at this point, like there is no sort of like data to back that up, right? And so we were talking about making a tooling for HR, you know, like where they would extract like all these like, you know, like when 2 people talk, they would extract all these features, and you would have like a baseline of whether like how the manager acts on average and how they're acting on other people. However, just like any other typical startup, we started hyper optimizing before we even wrote a single line of code. So we decided to focus on audio. And audio is also important to me because I am from Nepal. And Nepalese is an interesting language because it's very monotonous. The vowels are very short-lived. We don't have very strong intonations. And consequently, what that means is that like people read my emotional state wrong a lot of times. Like for example, like I have to be very dramatic and very exaggerated to convey my feelings. And I have beliefs that like it has affected my past relationship. And what if it also affects my interaction with managers? Like what if they're like, oh, Bivu doesn't seem very excited about this project, right? And my background is interesting enough, but my co-presenter, Esty, has even more interesting background. I'll later talk.
So I'm one of the white people in Boulder that Bivu was referring to. But like everyone here, I'd like to believe I am very unique. My life is dictated by two kinds of code. On one hand, in my career, I spend most of my day writing code, creating systems for software engineers to write secure code. I mostly use Ruby, so much for cutting edge. But my life is also dictated by another kind of code, the code of Kabbalah, the inner mystical dimension of the universe. Just to give you one example of what that code means is I'd like to tell you about something that I do every single week. Every single week on Friday, commencing at sundown, I do Shabbat. I totally disconnect from technology no matter what is going on that week, no matter what craziness is happening. I spend time, and instead, I reconnect with myself. I reconnect with my family and my friends who are in close walking distance. This is just a glimpse of who I am and the codes that I live by.
Here, like, she's different, I'm different. But the point is, everybody in this room is different in their own ways. So what we do is we make shortcuts. We make these little models in our head, right? Like, we have idea of like how somebody's feeling based on how they sound, or what somebody should or should not know based on how they look. And we are making these little decisions all the time. But the problem is, like, these models were built over thousands of years of evolution, or through our, like through tens of years of our livelihood, right? But the thing is, like, at this point, synthetic audio, aka deepfake audio, is becoming a thing. Essentially, the sounds made by computer and that we hold so close and dear to our heart actually aren't real. And essentially, the question is, like, is that gonna affect our trust? Because whenever we are stressed or when we're tired, we listen to music, we talk to our friends and family. But the thing is, soon enough, when you talk to somebody, they might sound like our family, but it might be a sound generated by a computer. So in that case, what kind of mind game is that sound gonna play with us? And it's not a hypothetical concept. Synthetic audio is already a thing, and we believe that synthetic audio fraud, SAF frauds, are going to become a big thing very, very soon. And in order to elaborate how damaging they already are, I'm going to give the microphone to my co-presenter.
So let me take you through the process of creating a deepfake. I want to convince you that it just takes 30 seconds.
When the government was chasing me, I wanted to get a sense of how close they were. And to me, this was a game. It was like kind of like I was a little bit insane, and I treated my fugitive status as like a big video game. Unfortunately, I'm not saying I'm the best hacker in the world, but I'm definitely in the top 10 of people who have been caught.
That was the legendary Kevin Mitnick. And he is still socially engineering us. So how does this work in the back end? Synthetic audio, the process of creating synthetic audio, is a really intricate process. Take this. MP3 audio is sampled at 41.1 kilohertz. That's 44,100 vibrations per second. In order to process this complex data, we need large models. If you take a look at this screen and you take a look at the right, we can see that our landscape has completely changed, which is why Bivu and I are here today. The complexity of our models has literally skyrocketed, scaling from millions of parameters just a couple of short years ago to trillions of parameters today in 2023. Recently, Meta released plans for creating a new foundational model called Megabyte. This model creates predictions at a byte level. Essentially, any kind of file, any kind of data is just bytes at the end of the day. So if you can make predictions at a byte level, you can totally skip the step, the bottleneck, of pre-processing or tokenization. This will allow us to work in a much more efficiently with all kinds of data types, including malware, including audio, including video, including photo. Recent developments like ChatGPT have totally democratized access to these tools. Giving access to these powerful models to everyday people is like giving nuclear energy to everyday people. In the right hands, it can be used to power cities. In the right hands, it can be used to understand the world around us. In the right hand, it can be used to create memes, for heaven's sake. But in the wrong hands, it can be used to create tools of mass destruction. So is this all hypothetical talk, or is this already happening? And what's it costing us already, today? What can we lose if we don't address this head on? A recent case study that came out from McAfee that surveyed over 7,000 people in 11 different countries found that this is a real problem. 1 in 4 of the survey participants there we go. 1 of 4 survey participants were found to either be affected personally or knew someone who had. In India, that number is even higher, with 50% of Indian survey participants affected. The average loss was 77. The average, I'm getting all my numbers wrong today. 77% of the victims actually lost money. The average cost being over $1,000 and sometimes even up to $15,000. That's a really hard hit, considering that median American has $1,000 in savings. Consider another case study from Santander's. Fraudsters are impersonating bank officials, telling victims that their account was frauded and they need to move money to a safe account. The average cost for this kind of scam, $7,000. These attacks have skyrocketed and have increased 11% in the first quarter of this year since ChatGPT was released, resulting in over 10.2 million fraud attacks. We just covered common cases that happen every day to everyday people. But what about a scheme that could have been planned for months or even years and stole away millions of dollars? Consider this. In 2020, a Japanese bank manager gets a call from somebody he recognizes really well. It's his director telling him really great news. The company is going through an acquisition, and he needs him to just authorize transfers of $35 million. He gets real confirmation emails from the lawyer, from the director himself, and he begins transferring the money. Poof, we don't know where the money is. End of the story. This just goes to show how much can be stolen, how much damage there is with well-orchestrated attacks. And this is just tipping the, what do we say, tipping the top of all of this, scraping at this problem. Voice ID is also a major problem. We've seen that institutions like Centrelink, Lloyds Bank, Australian Tax Office, voice ID systems are susceptible to these kinds of attacks, making hackers able to steal personal information, request documents or medical information from these vulnerable systems. If the cases that we've explored aren't unsettling enough, let's talk about the elephant in the room. All of these attacks were done asynchronously, including voicemails, including short recorded prompts. So, which means that the person on the other end is preemptively thinking what the victim might say, and then clicking on that audio file. So if you listen closely, there's going to be some kind of gap. You might be a little bit suspicious. But real-time cloning is on the horizon. Bivu managed to recreate real-time voice cloning during the research for our presentation in certain scenarios. We believe that this will exponentially supercharge this fraud market. So before we end off, let's talk about some things that we discussed. Voice cloning is increasingly possible and accurate. The risk of AI voice cloning fraud is resulting in real financial loss today. Real-time voice cloning will supercharge these scams. I'm going to pass it back to Bivu, and he's going to talk about how we can exponentially exploit this vulnerability.
Thank you for painting such a clear picture of synthetic audio fraud, Esty. And if you remember the title of the talk, it's about synthetic trust, right? And in this section, I'm going to try to paint a picture of like how we can leverage the current existing technology and perhaps like even the ones that are right at the horizon to do a mass-scale fraud. And just to let you guys know, like we haven't done that ourselves, but it's just that like we're aware of all the technologies that are available and could be done, but we haven't like attempted like mass-scale fraud ourselves. So before that, there was an article on Bloomberg. And essentially, there's a research done about how much you can predict somebody's characteristics just from their voice. Like, for example, like turns out you can predict their age. Of course, you can predict their gender. You don't need AI for that. Turns out you can like predict their dialects, consequently where they come from and where they live. And there was another paper where they were able to replicate their sibling's voice based on their voice. In other words, you know, like just like I mentioned earlier, voice doesn't come at random. It's a function of our body, and it's a function about our societal growing up, right? And because we want to be very efficient and considerate hackers, so we only want to target people who are likely to be hacked. And so historically speaking, the group of people that's been defrauded the most in America are older people above 55 from the South. And so what you're going to do is we're going to go to white pages, look at all the zip codes, and try to figure out like who lives there. And then we can use services like Slide Dial that lets you bypass your prompt. You know, like when you call somebody, you get a ringtone. It actually goes straight to your voicemail. And you can just get a sample of your voice. And all you need is a few seconds of the voice, and you can know how old they are, right? And now that will help us know if they are like our intended target. And what you're going to do is we're going to again use white pages. And then we're going to scrape data to see who other younger people are related to them and are available on social media. And McAfee has this study where apparently more than 50% of young people put their voices online. And so what you're going to do is we're going to scrape their voices. And all we need, if you remember from the Kevin Mitnick clip, it's just a few seconds. And then we're going to call them at 4 p.m. on Friday. And we're going to say, hey, I just got arrested. And if you don't leave X amount of money in this account, I might have a permanent record. And because we do have like love and blind trust for the people that we really, really love, so there's a higher chance that we might just do something abrupt. Like, you know, at that point, it's not necessarily about doing like the logical thing. And we might even question if that's a fraud. But the point is like, the results are way too high, and we don't want to take that challenge. And essentially, like if you think about this, all this thing that I'm talking can be automated. Second thing is, just like we mentioned in my first section, every community has its own characteristic behavior. For example, like my co-presenter Esty comes from Hasidic Jewish background, and apparently they use a lot of rabbi's name as their password, right? And if you ask ChatGPT, hey, like what do people in the border like? They like, climbing and drinking beer, right? But the thing is, in smaller communities, and especially smaller religious communities, they tend to have higher level of trust. I think that's self-obvious, but if you go to our site, we actually have like put some studies that like try to quantify this process. And so what this means is we're going to try to figure out like who the leader in that community is. For example, like say we go to a rabbi who runs a particular synagogue. And if you guys went to the keynote and paid attention, Maria had this thing called as internet as attack vector, right? And so that means like there's so many content on the internet, you can leverage that for your nefarious purpose. And turns out like on a lot of synagogue website, they have a list of people who donated. And it also has a list of how much they donated. So essentially I could go to try to find out like if the rabbi has a voice somewhere, clone his voice, and then essentially try to figure out their number, and then leave them a voicemail, right? And everybody has guilt inside of them. Like everyone wants to help the community. And I feel like at that point, logic is going to go under the bus, and your desire to help your community is going to come ahead. And so essentially, in the past, like I had to hang out with that for weeks and weeks before you knew all these secrets. But the thing is, you can just go to ChatGPT and like ask questions, and you can know so much. And another thing is all these generative AI tools have that tooling abilities of AI. You can like clone somebody's voice, but they don't have our intelligence. But if you have used ChatGPT, it's pretty smart. I bet like it's way more grammatically correct than me most of the time. And recently, Facebook released this model called Llama 2. And it's kind of like a ChatGPT, but much smaller. However, even in CPU, it runs really fast. It generates tens of words every second, even in CPU. And soon enough, when you have a real-time text-to-speech, or even like real-time like speech cloning, you could almost have this like back and forth going on. Before this talk, actually, I was trying to like do all of this thing, but I didn't have time. But I might do that in the future, just for my personal curiosity. So you guys just keep on like checking out our GitHub, like the synthetic hypertrust, and I think I'll like put some content there. And then another thing is when Edward Snowden, like he left America for Russia, he let it be known that NSA had been tracking people using their voices since 2006. So they had voice tracking technology back in 2006. And I don't know like the intricacies. I'm just guessing at this point. But the point is like if you wanted to throw somebody under the bus, you could probably just clone their voice and then just kind of leave a trace of like where they've been to, who they hang out with. And I'm pretty sure like NSA is very aware of this upcoming technology, but they're big, big entities. And they're not going to be as agile as like fraudsters and these smaller companies. So that means like there's like probably a lot, like they would be affected by this upcoming synthetic audio frauds, right? And for me, the biggest threat is the unknown. If we were able to create real-time synthetic audio during our experimentation, just imagine like bigger governments or bigger entities with more talents and more resources, and most importantly, more incentives are capable of. And they might be doing something under the hood that we don't even know. And that's like my biggest fear. And I feel like for me, the takeaway of this section is that everyone is going to be affected, from like individuals to little communities and all the way to countries. And all these tools that we need to do so are easily available. And if you don't want to pay for API services like 11 Labs, these are actually based on open source models that you can actually use, run on your laptop. So you don't even need to pay money. And this technology is advancing so fast, and it's like pretty scalable. And then your voice tells a lot about you than you think. Something as, it's pretty known because like voice is like as personal as it gets, right? And the third thing is like everybody has these like biases and preferences, and I feel like they can be leveraged to generate trust, so people have like lower barrier to entry for being hacked. And I was calling it Schrodinger's call, because like you hear a voice. You don't know if it's like your friend Max on the other side, somebody trying to take your money, maybe a cat. The only way to know is, like when the box opens, but thing is, you might have lost a lot of money or even your trust. However, there's always light at the end of the tunnel, and in the next section, Esty is going to talk about potential solutions.
Before we talk about solutions to this alarming technology, I just want to give you a side note. Unfortunately, I don't think this will work on me or my family. A few years ago, my brother, who's actually here in the audience, called my grandma saying that he was in jail and that he needed bail immediately. My grandma's immediate response was, "Why are you calling me? Call your mom, for heaven's sake." So the problem is, though, not everybody is like my amazing grandma. And so how do we protect our friends, our families, our grandmas? The first thing that we have to be aware of is that the people that are going to be the most vulnerable are going to be the least aware. So it's really important to educate all of our family and friends about these kinds of attacks. Essentially, if anybody gets a dire threat or a dire call from you, they always need to verify with the second method of communication that it's really you. This can be call, text, FaceTime. Essentially, it's a human MFA. Hackers will use this urgency and fear to convince you to hand over money. But education, while education is key, it's not enough. We need technical problems to we need technical solutions to technical problems. I'm sure there's also going to be a lot of problems in our technical solutions. It turns out, while machines are not perfect at detecting synthetic audio, they're much better than human beings. As Bivu mentioned, human beings can only detect synthetic audio 57% of the time, which is like 7% better than random chance. Machines are really, really good at picking up vibrations. OK. We use a TNS. As we discussed before, audio is a really high-dimensional data. But we use a TNSE plot to graph how similar the sounds are to each other. The blue dots represent the synthetic audio. As you can see, it's extremely clustered. The orange dots represent real audio. As you can see, in the TNSE plot, the real audio is much more scattered. Even in reduced dimensionality states. To understand this a little bit intuitively, if you had a clone of my voice, it would be replaying a pattern. If you're listening to me, I mess up sometimes. My voice is louder when I'm excited. Sometimes when I'm mad, I don't even talk. When somebody is actually talking, there's a lot more variance in their voice. We can use this fact to train AI to detect synthetic audio. But it's important to understand that this will always be a cat and mouse game. Hackers will always be ahead of machines. Essentially, machines are looking for vibrations. They're looking for past patterns. But hackers have new technology such as Meta's megabyte or their own intuition to create new samples of data. One example of this is we talked before about how synthetic audio is a lot more clustered. And so when hackers understand this, they can just modify their audio with a general, of course, they can just modify their audio to avoid detection. Another promising method by Yisrael Mirsky in Israel is this concept of deepfake CAPTCHA. It's built on the idea of CAPTCHA, these annoying challenges we get all day verifying that we're not a robot. Essentially, it's a challenge and response method. The challenge is being really easy for a human to complete, but really hard for machines to complete because they're abnormal challenges. For example, singing and clapping at the same time. The models have not seen this abnormal data, so it's much harder for them to pass this CAPTCHA. Depending on the challenges, and according to their research, this method has over 90% accuracy in certain cases. But before we start clicking and buying those solutions from those LinkedIn emails that we get, we have to remember, as Maria said before, we need to choose our solution carefully. It's not only important to have great algorithms, it's really important to understand which business problem we're solving and to ensure that the solution is built for that niche. This is going to be a cat and mouse game. And so we need to understand that when we buy a solution, they need to be ahead. They need to have this nuanced understanding of the hackers in the space and preemptively create solutions when there's not enough data to train models. Another thing to look out for is expect new protocols and new standards coming out. If I can't tell who my partner is, I need a way to digitally sign that audio with a few biometric indicators. Let me rephrase this again. Audio is so fundamental to who we are, and we need to always be confident that we're speaking to who we think we're speaking to. And so we think the industry is going to roll out some new solutions to combat that. One of them being a private public key for audio. In terms of camera manufacturers, I would expect them to digitally sign their images so that we can be sure that it's not modified in the process. This is not a complete solution, but this is definitely the path that I would expect our industry to take. Turns out, while this is a societal problem, there are people that are more responsible. We believe banks and telcos should be a little bit more responsible for this problem. However, there hasn't in the past been enough incentive for these institutions to implement a solution. And here's why. The telco industry is technically in the perfect spot to roll out a solution. They control the entire call infrastructure. The problem is telcos are really slow to change. This is because they rely on legacy infrastructure, which is really costly to update. They'd much prefer to wait it out and let the industry laws form around their behavior. Eventually, we can expect telcos to implement solutions, but we need medium in short-term solutions for the meantime. This is why we created a synthetic fraud adapter to target and to help all of the people who are in this bind. Our grandmas who have landlines and won't be able to implement any new technology for a while. This adapter will alert them in real time of fraud, including synthetic audio fraud, SAF, and let them know that they should hang up the phone immediately. I think telcos and banks will roll out similar solutions to the one that we created. What about governments? We talked before, Bivu talked before about the NSA. I talked before about Centrelink. Governments are very slow moving. And that's not necessarily a bug. That's a feature. We don't want governments to move too fast because we don't want governments to move quickly because that will create instability. There's an internal email about FBI freaking out about this kind of technology, and we can expect that legislation will be really slow to take actions on this. So there's a lot of takeaways. One of them, educate everybody you know about human MFA. Detecting AI deepfakes is possible, and it will be a game of cat and mouse. Expect new protocols to come out. Fraud is a societal problem, but banks and telcos should be more responsible. And finally, new solutions should retrofit with old technology. Now that we've talked about the different implications, the different solutions, let's talk about geopolitical challenges. Something that's even scarier than vulnerable systems is that we've witnessed the influence of text posts and fake accounts in the 2016 US elections with Cambridge Analytica. We've seen how much damage just text-based posts can do. But with synthetic audio and video and images, this gets so much more exponentially scary. Let's consider an example, Michaela. This Instagram model earns $10 million a year. She has 3 million followers. She's beautiful. She's smart. She's perfect, but she's not real. Take this. Somebody who is not real is more successful than you.
Me.
Acknowledging AI, even though that she acknowledges that she is AI, a significant portion of her followers, particularly those that are Gen Z, don't think that she is human because she has feelings and she has opinions. And the reality is, social influencers like Michaela get 3 times as much engagement as human influencers. We're approaching a future where discerning real followers from AI might be nearly impossible. Having thousands of followers on social media, but only a fraction of them human. In such a world, our susceptibility to manipulation and misinformation grows exponentially. And so as we wrap up, I want you to all think, how ready are we to navigate this complex landscape? What steps do we have to take to ensure that we can be in touch with what's real and what's not in this increasingly AI-dominated world? Thank you.